My name is Zara Malik. I am 15 when I run. I grew up believing a single terrifying rule. The moment a girl bleeds for the first time, her life belongs to someone else. In my family, the crimson line was a deadline. It didn't matter if the girl was 12 or 14, that drop of blood meant a husband, a dowry, a ceremony. You breathed in the rule until it filled your lungs. You thought everyone else did it too. So did I, until the year everything unspooled. When I was 11, I watched my cousin Mina get promised to a man 3 times her age. She had been promised only 3 days after her first period. He was 43 and wore suits that smelled like money and cement dust. His name was Hassan Kareem, and his voice made grown women bend like reeds. The whispers said he had lost 2 wives young. The family told us not to listen to whispers. They told us to listen to custom. That night, the night I learned there were things you could do to change a path, I stopped eating like the others. I did not do it for vanity. I did it because in our house, the thinner girls waited longer for the blood, and waiting could mean surviving childhood. The other girls called me skeleton. It didn't bother me. Skeleton kept my mouth closed and fit the role they expected. Fridays were training days, not the kind you'd studied for in school, training for silence. From 1 in the morning until 10 the next morning, I served bowls of rice and tea to the older men without looking anyone in the eye. Speak and the belt would come down. Dropped a plate, 10 lashes. Ask a question, 10 lashes. My hands were toughened by holding burning pots without mitts until the scars looked like topography. My mother, Lila, would smear bright creams across my cheeks so nobody from outside would see the tired skin and think me less worthy. I was the perfect daughter on paper. I smiled when people complimented how excited I was to be a wife someday. I lied because it was what kept the house quiet. When I turned 14, I found a small, dangerous thing, a pamphlet. One afternoon at Willowbrook High, Miss Rosa Delgado, my science teacher, left a drawer unlocked. Inside were books and leaflets with titles like Your Rights as a Young Person and When Tradition Becomes Crime. They were written in clear language, not the kind of euphemisms my family used. I skinned those pages with my eyes, heart hammering, reading about laws that said marriage under 18 could be abusive. No cultural loopholes. There were phone numbers for shelters and exact phrases that would trigger mandatory reporting. It was like finding a map in a land where I had only ever seen fences. I took the finished pamphlet and pressed it into my waistband. For nights when everyone thought I slept, I memorized lines until they sat in my mouth like talismans. I'm being forced to marry. I am a minor. My family is trying to make me leave school. I learned which teachers were mandated reporters and which counselors had been known to call the authorities. I learned the names of organizations that would pick you up if you could get to a phone. I started a small club in my uncle's tool shed. Wife Skills, they called it in front of our elders. The name was a ruse. In truth, it was a school of escape. 6 younger cousins who had not bled yet crowded into the shed. We whispered. We practiced the phrases that could open the courthouse doors. We made lists of who to contact. We rehearsed how to speak without our voices cracking. We were children teaching children how not to be sold. Then everything sped up. When I was 15, the blood came while I was at the sink, stirring batter for morning breakfasts. It soaked through the dress I had to wear every day. The house erupted in joy. My mother kissed my cheeks and the aunties came running, laughing about fresh spices and new households. By nightfall, my father had already chosen the man, Hassan Kareem, the same man who had taken Mina before, would be my husband. He'd buried 2 wives, the gossip said. Kidney failure, they said. Nobody said the word pregnancy aloud in the house, as if saying it would conjure a child too soon. 2 days later, Anissa, my cousin from the shed who had been studying the pamphlets with me, bled too. Within hours, they were discussing her like livestock, a 51-year-old man who collected wives like trinkets had come forward. I remember the way her eyes lost their light when they described the dowry as if she were a price tag. That night, I slipped her my notebook, the one thick with shelter numbers and the phrases that would make someone have to listen. I told her, "Tell Miss Delgado, use the words I taught you." My optimism was a foolish thing. That night, the sheriff's car lights bled through our yard. A line of officers knocked at the door. My father's face moved from smugness to fury as they asked about recent pledges, about who had access to certain classrooms, and who had been advising girls. They wanted to talk to every female under 18. After they left, my family turned the house inside out. My uncle's tool shed was ransacked. My journal, the one with the shelter addresses written in the margins, was found and burned in front of us. My father threw the pages into the flames and called me diseased. It was the kindest word he used. "You are being married tomorrow," he announced as though announcing a holiday. The wedding was planned for dawn. I had a small plastic bag hidden, a change of clothes, a pair of socks, a scrap of money I'd stolen from my mother's purse, $1 at a time. I had the shelter addresses memorized. My heartbeat had taught them to me at night. At dawn, my mother's hand shook as she tried to dress me in red. I faked a pain, the kind I had practiced for days, and when she opened the bathroom door to check, I shoved my head through the half-painted window I had been prying loose for weeks. My mother screamed on the other side of the door, and the pounding of fists started. The lock splintered, and I dropped into wet grass with my ankle twisting but my feet free. I ran barefoot through the neighborhood of identical houses where our community clustered, homes with elaborate curtains and identical front porches. My cousins shouted, cars started, I cut through gardens, ran past Mr. Patel's hedges and Mrs. Bell's pool. A piece of glass lodged in my heel, I left bloody footprints. I flagged down the first bus. A woman in the front seat handed me change without asking questions. Her simple act of handing me loose coins in a tissue is something I still remember as if it were a prayer. I rode to downtown, where the courthouse loomed like a promise I had never been allowed to believe in. The clerk at family court looked at my feet, at my torn dress, at the emergency protective order that I had taught myself how to write on paper in the tool shed. "Emergency protective order," I said. I was breathless and shaking. "I'm 15. They're forcing me to marry today." They listened. The judge read the petition aloud in the lobby, a hurried, human thing, and granted an emergency order. It took 30 cold minutes for the law to begin to protect me. I clung to that sheet of paper like a raft. The shelter on the list was full. Full. My chest felt hollow hearing it. The phone call confirmed the worst. No space for 3 nights. I had nowhere to go. I knew my family would find me in less than that. I thought of Miss Delgado. She had left the pamphlets loose. Maybe she had meant me to find them. I went to the high school, found her in the Saturday quiet with a red pen and a pile of essays. The second she saw me, she moved like a mother who had been waiting. She cleaned my bleeding feet with the nurse's kit in the classroom and sat with me when I convulsed into real sobs. She called CPS and lawyers and anyone who would answer. The system, I learned painfully, moved like weather. Sometimes swiftly, sometimes not at all. My father's voice found me at school through a phone call. Calm, businesslike. "She's sick. She needs medication," he told Miss Delgado when she answered. They had followed the phone. They had our location. I watched the screen as he lied. The school security footage, which Mr. Will Carter pulled up for us, showed my father and uncles arriving at my house with prescription bottles in hand before the morning struggle. I felt the floor tilt under me. Fear can be a physical thing. When the police questioned everyone, the evidence mounted. My essays, the ones where I had written in coded ways about burns and silence, which Miss Delgado had kept, matched the scratches and burns on my arms. The security guard's phone had footage of my father entering the house that morning. The CPS supervisor said softly, "We're taking her into protective custody." My father's face when they escorted him away was enraged. "You are dead to us." He spat in Arabic, his voice doubling down with the weight of their shame. My mother took off her hijab later and held it like a funeral flag. In their world, I had failed. In mine, I had finally chosen. They took me to a hospital first because of the glass in my foot. They cleaned me and bandaged me and took photographs like proof of harm. There is a sterile, absurd compassion in hospital corridors. Then they tried to find me a placelet. The calendar of shelters was an obstacle map of no and maybe. Weekend placements are the hardest. The county was full.
A tired woman named Marta Green, a CPS coordinator with eyes that had seen too many midnight phone calls, took charge and called every contact she had until a retired nurse named Dorothea Dottie Hayes agreed to host me. The home Dottie offered was not glamorous. It was secure. Tall fences, cameras, alarms. She had done this before. The first night her door closed behind us, and I felt both relief and a terrible sense of exile. I was safe, but I had lost a family. Theodora, Dorothea, took me into a small room and listened to my story without flinching. She had security protocols and an instinct like a compass. She called the police the second a woman from my family, my aunt, pressed a camera to the gate and held up signs. "We love you, come home," the sign read. It was manipulation dressed as deflection. Dottie photographed the sign and put it in my file. My father's lawyer began a campaign to get me back. He spoke of parental rights and cultural preservation while he filed papers. The family filled courtrooms and called in leaders from the mosque to testify that we were a family-preserving tradition. They used familiar names and rituals like armor. Patrice Alvarez, the legal aid attorney assigned to me, taught me how the other side worked. They would use religion, culture, and family as shields. We would use child welfare statutes, documented injuries, and testimony. We were completely outgunned in money, but not in truth. The battle became public. My father posted on social media that I was mentally ill, that I had been taken by people feeding me dangerous ideas. The post was shared hundreds of times. My picture circulated in community chat groups as a girl who needs help. Their friends posted rewards and prayers. It was like watching a wildfire start in a field of dry grass. The worst betrayal was watching the faces I recognized in propaganda videos. Maya, the younger cousin I had tried to protect, recorded a tightly worded testimony with her mother reciting, "She turned us against our parents." The way her voice slid into the script told me who had written it. They were coaching my family into sobbing grief into statements of horror. Their campaign intensified. Anonymous envelopes arrived with photos of my grandmother and my sister and letters meant to hollow me out with guilt. Anna's image, Anissa, appeared in a photograph where she stood dull and edged with an engagement ring. A message scrawled on the back read, "She came home. She is happy now." When Patrice and I met with Anissa alone, my cousin's eyes were dead. She mouthed that they had forced her to come home and that they were threatened my sister if she disobeyed. She gave me a scrap of paper with a neighborhood name, a place where other girls lived, and she whispered, "They're making an example of you." I learned two things at once. Even those who come home can be broken, and the network I had started was more dangerous to my family than they wanted to admit. They tried intimidation, escalation, and legal tactics. A van full of men trespassed on Dottie's property one night, smashing out a window and leaving muddy footprints like signatures. They threatened everyone who tried to help me. They sent lawyers to file civil claims in the hope of bankrupting our defenders. They hacked old social accounts and reactivated them with postmen to paint me unstable. And yet, even as they screamed louder, the small, stubborn thing I had started kept growing. The so-called wife skills notebooks I had stitched together were being found in bathrooms, under mattresses, in math problem margins. Girls who had never thought of going to a teacher now whispered line numbers in case law. One of them, a timid friend from a different block, came to me clutching a notebook. She had been promised at 12. The words I had once memorized for myself became the language she used to call for help. The turning point came in court when a woman walked into the gallery and said her name, Fatima Kareem. She had been married to Hassan Kareem when she was 15. She told her pregnancies close together, of kidneys that failed, and of a family who pretended she had died rather than admit she left. She produced medical records. She showed photos of a grave that had been faked. Her testimony was the break in the ice. The judge, faced with documentation and first-hand horror, granted a permanent protective order. The judge said, plainly, that my parents would have no contact with me. Criminal charges would follow any violation. My father stood up and vowed retribution. My mother announced to the courtroom that we had no daughter. They erased me in public as if deletion would smooth over harm. But erasure has a strange power. It exposes what is left. If they publicly disowned me, then I was truly free to build something else. We called our network the Freedom Network in a joking whisper at first. Then the laugh disappeared and the work began. Volunteers bothered Miss Delgado, Dottie, Patrice, and Marta, and a retired officer named Tom Erickson who housed girls in apartments above his garage. We learned new tactics. We hid phone numbers in Alsberg columns. We sewed emergency cash into book covers. We taught girls how to say the exact words that would compel teachers to act. We taught them how to document scars. They tried to make me an example. They filed appeals. They published videos with coach testimonies. They hired men to smash cameras on fences. But other girls began to change their futures. Samira Khan, 16, did a trick she had learned from a frantic phone call, feigned stomach pain at a checkpoint, and grabbed a passerby officer's sleeve until CPS arrived. I watched from a hidden car and learned what courage can look like when it is practiced. We made pamphlets in little hidden packets and packed them inside cop position books. We printed legal language disguised as history notes and hid helplines inside multiplication tables. We distributed them to school nurses who could quietly watch for signs. The first girl who came forward clutching such a packet told me, I wasn't sure I deserved options. Hearing that, I wanted to stop pretending a single escape would fix everything. We needed a system that kept working after I was gone. At times, the harassment became overtly criminal. Someone torched a car outside an officer's house, and in the trunk were burned dolls dressed in wedding gowns. The message was clear. Burn their symbols, scare their defenders. We moved fast afterwards, switching safe houses twice. Each time we moved, there was a rush of dread like the intake of breath before a plunge. We slept with panic buttons in every room, with officers on rotating night shifts, and with cameras that pinged to the county if an alarm tripped.
The press took an interest after a brave reporter agreed to run an anonymous piece that told the pattern without naming victims. The article spread. Women who had hidden for years wrote to us. Organizations offered funds. Fatna sent photos of her nursing cab. She had become a nurse in another life, and a short letter. "You can build a life after this." That was the bravest line I read in months. As easy as the web grew, the attacks shifted forms. Legal suits arrived seeking to claim we recruited girls into dangerous situations, a legal strategy to make helpers think twice. Other times, the attacks were humiliation campaigns in community centers and businesses. The shop where Dottie shopped a dozen times began to refuse service. Lawyers filed a civil suit against us that had the smell of revenge. Still, the network kept rescuing. 3 girls came to shelters in a single week because of our packets. Another 6 called together from a friend's phone. They were terrified and whispered answers into the line. They learned phrases to get teachers to start a chain of reporting. They learned where to hide a few dollars for a bus. For every girl our family or relatives tried to drag back, there were now 2 girls who had been hidden in plain sight by a teacher, by a neighbor, by another cousin with a notebook. There was a day I thought about running away from the fight altogether. Friends begged me to go into witness protection, to let the government anonymize me into safety. But every time I imagined disappearing, I thought of the girls in the tool shed who had nowhere to go and nowhere to believe. I could run, I could disappear, or I could stay and show a possibility. I chose the latter. The final public stand came at the courthouse, where the judge renewed the protective order and then, as if to set a point in the sand, stated that the court would protect girls who were coerced into marriage under the guise of culture. That ruling was small and huge all at once. It meant that the laws we had used were being interpreted to help the children hiding under cultural pretexts. After the court, Fatima, who had driven 3 hours, hugged me, not as a savior, but as someone who had labored a long season in fear and came out on the other side. Photographers took our picture. For once, the headlines were not mine alone. They were about a pattern. They were about a mother who had lied about death because the family valued reputation more than help. They were about the incoherent logic that had let girls die under the strain of too many pregnancies and too little care. Soon our little Freedom Network had volunteers from places I had never imagined. Lawyers, therapists who specialized in cultural trauma, retired cops, teachers who had seen the same signs without enough resources. We wrote protocols so teachers would not be the only ones making ad hoc decisions: what to file, how to record entries, how to secure a transient safe house.
One evening, a new call came in. Girls from 3 different states had notebooks now. They had copied the math problems and hidden the contact information in plain sight. The network was a whisper that found ears. We began to see patterns beyond our own community. Others had experienced the same cycles of forced unions, disguised as tradition. They were calling us, asking how to make their own little pockets of resistance. There were setbacks. A cousin who had been brought home recanted. Her eyes suggested coercion. Lawyers threatened to subpoena. Trolls posted hateful messages. For each scare, there were also small victories. Samira's rescue was one. Another girl who had been promised at 12 began therapy and later enrolled back in school. Fatima's photo of her nursing scrubs arrived in the mail like proof that survival could become a life. Sometimes I would lie awake and count the names of girls who had come to us. I would think about the first one, the one who had handed me a folded piece of paper in the tool shed years ago, and the loop my life had made from being a child to becoming someone who draws maps for other children to follow. We kept publishing. We changed tactics when they adapted. We rotated safe houses when men appeared outside the fences. We recorded everything. Threats, envelopes, cameras at the edge of driveways, men in vans who pretended to be contractors. We sued back sometimes. Patrice taught me how the legal trenches work. She said, "They will try to bankrupt us with suits that have no merit. We'll be slow, but truth has a stubborn way of outlasting noise." The most decisive truth for me was simple. Girls could say no. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't certain or fast. It was a series of messy, painful steps toward autonomy. There were nights when I wished I had never known the pamphlet, and days when I thanked God for the unlocked drawer in Miss Delgado's class. One afternoon, not long after the protective order was permanently entered, I walked through a school corridor I had not been allowed to see for months. A small girl approached me shyly in the library and slipped a note into my hand. I told my teacher. She believed me. They brought me here. "Thank you," it said. My eyes filled up. Later that day, I sat at a table with other girls and volunteers, and we planned how to reach more. We wrote new packets and thought about encryption and code words. We taught girls how to memorize a number in a math problem. It never ended. It couldn't. The families who were willing to sell their daughter's future for tradition would keep trying. But the thing that had started in the tool shed now had a backbone. It had lawyers who perceived patterns, nurses who could sign emergency placements, teachers who had memorized the phrases that compelled reporting, and neighbors who would ring the police within minutes. We mapped routes, camera angles, and save house chains. Sometimes, when the phone rang at night and another girl whispered words I had once whispered, I would feel that same cold fear rise. Then I would remember the bus driver who had held the door for me. I would remember Fatima's photos of a life built after survival. I would remember Samira's scream at the checkpoint that became the key to her rescue. I would remember the sign that my aunt held up at Dottie's camera, "We love you, come home," and how we had answered it with a new kind of love, one that gave choices. People asked me later if I regretted exposing my family. They meant the law, the judge, the public articles, the airing of things my parents wanted to hide. I never did. I do not romanticize the split that followed. My mother called me dead in a private text, and my father cursed me in public prayer. But I had become proof to other girls that even if your family disowns you, somebody will remember you. That is the strange arithmetic of it. I lost a family, and I gained a cause. The cause saved other girls. Some of them returned to their families on their own terms. Some of them fled for good. We sat with both outcomes and kept making more packets. We taught girls to pretend to faint so they'd be carried to an emergency room. We taught counselors how to move faster. We taught drivers which neighborhoods to watch. In quiet moments, when it was my turn to rest, I would stare at the address Anissa had once given me, a yellow row house in a neighborhood I recognized. I imagined the other girls behind those closed doors who might one day tuck an information packet into a math book, a secret seed. I imagined them memorizing a hotline like a prayer. We did small, ridiculous things to keep hope practical. We stashed $20 bills in library books. We recorded security camera angles. We taught girls how to tell a nurse to please call CPS in specific words that could not be misinterpreted. We made escape into a craft. That craft saved lives. It made the difference between someone being dragged into a car and a girl making it to a bus. It made the difference between being buried in silence and being photographed at graduation. On a late winter afternoon, Fatima and I sat in a small coffee shop after a hearing. We did not need many words. We had both been remade. She smiled and said, "They thought they could scare us into nothing. Instead, they taught us how to be louder." She reached across the table and took my hand. I had been 15 when I ran through the painted window and into the grass. I had been 15 when I learned the words that could save me. I kept teaching them. Girls kept arriving with notebooks and tears and courage. The Freedom Network grew like a rumor that had found the right ears. I cannot promise that every girl will escape. I cannot promise every family will choose love over reputation. But I can promise what we have proved, that knowledge is contagious, and that sometimes when a child finds a pamphlet she is not supposed to read, she will teach other children what to say into a phone, what to memorize, which heart to trust. She will make maps in the margins for those who come after her. And for the days when my father's lawyers filed another suit, or when a cousin's video went viral with rehearsed words, or when late at night the phone would ring with another frightened whisper, I would answer. I would say the same sentences I had memorized in that dark shed years ago. Tell the science teacher. Say you're being forced to marry. Say your family is making you. Say you are a minor. The words still work. They open doors. They create time. Time is everything. Time allows a case to be built, an order to be signed, a plane to be missed. If a girl gets one more hour, sometimes that's all she needs. Sometimes an hour buys a bus, a phone call, a friendly bus driver, a clerk who will not send her back. And every hour we bought for someone else was an hour that built something that could not be burned. The last time I went to the courthouse, the judge said, "This world must protect its children, even when culture claims exemption." It was a small sentence, and it had to be. Laws change slowly. People change faster. I still miss the house that taught me how to serve tea without talking. I still ached for the mother who put creams in my face because she thought it would help me marry well. I still remember the way my father paced before a wedding, considering reputation like a commodity. But when a girl from another neighborhood called and whispered her location, when an aunt slipped a folded page into a math book across town, I felt something that steadied me. Community can learn to protect its kids, even when parts of that community would never admit it's needed. That is how I became someone else. That is how the tool shed secret turned into a network that made a courthouse judge listen, that made a nurse risk a job, that made a retired officer open his spare room, that made a journalist publish an anonymous piece. When we wore down the culture of silence, it was not quick. It was 1,000 small acts. One teacher who didn't look away, one nurse who answered a weekend call, one woman who risked identity to testify, and a bus driver who took a kid without asking. If you are listening and you are a girl who knows that smell of stove race and the weight of a belt, if you have hidden a pamphlet in your waistband and memorized numbers until they live in your mouth, know this: you are not alone. If you hide a number inside a math problem and give it to a friend, you might be saving a life. I left my family and I learned the impossible. A map of escape can be built out of whispers. We stitched those whispers into manuals and gave them to girls. The network now runs on that economy. Small favors, memorized phrases, the kindness of strangers. I was 15 the first time I felt the law protected me. I was 15 when I saw the first girl escape because of a math problem. Since then, we've changed names, swapped houses, printed new packets. The work is relentless. The risk is real. The hope is stubborn. If anyone asks me whether telling the truth was worth it, I will show them the list of girls who got on a bus, who got a scholarship, who learned to be doctors and nurses and teachers. I will show them Fatima's photo in Scrubs. I will show them Samira's story to a room of young women who now work with us. I will show them the burned dolls and the photos in the mail that tried to scare us into silence. When I close my eyes, I can still smell the smoke from the journal my father burned. It is the smell of what they tried to erase. But smoke clears. The map that's hidden in a history book, inside a math problem, inside a teacher's desk, that map cannot be burned. It travels, it mutates, it learns new routes.
There are girls now who carry our packets and backpacks across 3 states. There are teachers who read the signs and act. There are safe houses with lines to emergency services. There are lawyers who won't be intimidated. For every small victory, I have learned to be grateful, and for every setback, I have learned to be relentless. People ask me later whether I forgave my mother. Forgiveness is something for private rooms and quiet prayers. I do not wear it like a costume. I do not tell children to forgive before they are safe. What I did learn is how to love, not the kind that requires erasing yourself, but the kind that gives options and respects choice. If my mother wants to forgive me in private 15 years from now, that is her choice. My job was not to be forgiven. My job is to make sure the next girl could say no. When I am older, I will teach my own classes about the biology of puberty and the law that protects minors. I'll teach it without shame. I'll keep a drawer unlocked. For now, I answer the phone. I hand another scared voice a math problem that hides a hotline. I teach the same phrases. I am a minor. I am being forced to marry. My family is forcing me. They open doors. They make space for time. I left that house at 15. I am still 15 deep in many ways, in memory and in madness and in stubbornness. The difference is that I now know where the doors are, and I know how to lead other girls toward them. If you have nothing else, memorize these phrases, keep them in your head like a prayer. Teach another girl, hide a number inside a homework problem, make a map in a shed. You may not know what it will become. For us, it became a network that will not stop. We will keep teaching those words until the next generation never has to hide for them. Zara Malik.